James Douglas Morrison, born December 8th, 1943, and died July 3rd, 1971. He wasn't just a rock star. He was a poet, a provocateur, a man who walked the line between genius and self-destruction. Jim Morrison lived like a storm, unpredictable, electric, and impossible to contain. And when that storm finally broke in Paris, the world was left with a question that still echoes today. I was Bobby Klein's the first official photographer of the Doors, and this shot was taken early on. It was 1967, and we're heading to Venice Beach to take some publicity shots, but got hungry. So Jim recommended stopping off at Lucky You Cafe, his favorite place in Los Angeles, to grab breakfast. It was a tiny Mexican restaurant owned by a Chinese man, pretty much just a counter with no tables. Jim ordered a beer and a menudo, a beef and chili soup, to line his stomach. It wasn't uncommon to see him sink 6 beers in an hour. I've always enjoyed shooting people when they're eating because it creates an intimacy. So I got behind the counter and started snapping away. Jim was beautiful. He looked like Michelangelo's David. He was checking me out. Who the hell is this guy? And this was early on in our relationship. There's an intensity in his eyes. He was totally serious about being seen as a credible poet. In the car back home, Jim and the rest of the band heard Break On Through, their debut single, on the radio for the first time, and everyone cheered. They got an inkling of what it would be like to have a hit. Jim was irreverent and mischievous. One time we were shooting outside, and he suddenly disappeared. He came back with this cheeky smile, and I took his picture. Only later, when I got the photos developed, did I realize what he had been doing. He'd hidden behind a tree, got himself aroused, and through his trousers was pointing his erection right at my camera. Another time, his girlfriend Pam came over, claiming Jim had pushed her into the closet and set it on fire. Jim and I were around the same age, and we clicked intellectually. He and his girlfriend Pam Corson moved into a place next door to where my wife and I live in Laurel Canyon. I remember one evening we spent together, smoking a load of hash and listening to a vinyl import of Sgt. Pepper. That was a great night. One night, Pam came over late, claiming Jim had tried to kill her. She said he had pushed her into the closet and set it on fire when he found out she had been sleeping with this phony prince who had supplied her with heroin. Jim hated heroin, so was maybe trying to scare her into going clean. She ended up staying with us for a few weeks. One night in the early 1990s, I had Oliver Stone, Val Kilmer, and Meg Ryan over for dinner and told them this story. Oliver ended up putting it into his Doors movie, which starred Val as Jim. The last time I saw Jim was in 1971, when the Doors played at the closing party we had for the Black Rabbit Inn, an organic restaurant I had launched with Jack Nicholson 4 years earlier. Jack invested $10,000 in it. Jim was very drunk and having a great time, but he was never a slurring, hopeless drunk. That's one thing Oliver's film got wrong. Jim could easily function on alcohol. He was always stimulating to speak to a visionary who would predict things that happened years later. Jim died in July that year. Later, Paul Rothschild, who was the band's producer, and I became close friends. He told me about Jim's death in Paris. He said Jim had come home drunk and found some powder on the dresser. He assumed it was cocaine and snorted a couple lines, but it was heroin, and he faded real fast. Pam put him in the bath to try to revive him, but it was too late. With his passing, our happy hippie days were over. For Bobby Klein, those years with Jim weren't just a job. They were a window into a young man wrestling with fame, identity, and the weight of his own legend. And as the 1960s faded into the rearview mirror, so did the innocence that had once defined them. Klein often said that Jim Morrison lived in 2 worlds at once. There was Jim, the thoughtful poet who devoured books, debated philosophy, and scribbled lines of verse on napkins. And then there was Morrison, the icon, the frontman, the unpredictable force of nature who could electrify a room or burn it down with equal ease. Bobby had photographed both versions, sometimes within the same roll of film. As the Doors grew, so did the mythology around Jim. But behind the lens, Bobby saw something different. A young man who wanted desperately to be taken seriously as a writer, not just a rock star. Someone who could be mischievous and irreverent one moment, then introspective and vulnerable the next. Someone who could drink heavily yet remain sharp, articulate, and startlingly perceptive. By the early 1970s, though, the cracks were showing. The pressures of fame, the legal battles, the expectations, they all weighed on him. Paris was supposed to be a reset, a place to breathe, a place to write, a place to disappear from the noise. But even oceans away, the past had a way of catching up. Bobby remembered the last time he saw Jim, 1971, at the closing party for the Black Rabbit Inn, the organic restaurant he had opened with Jack Nicholson. The Doors played that night, and Jim was in rare form. Drunk, yes, but animated, engaged, alive. He wasn't stumbling or incoherent. He was still Jim, unpredictable, magnetic, and full of ideas. Bobby said he could hold a conversation on alcohol better than most people could sober. That night felt like a reunion of old spirits. No cameras, no pressure, no mythology. Just friends sharing a moment before life pulled them in different directions. Bobby didn't know it would be the last time he'd ever see him. Months later, the news came from Paris. Jim Morrison was gone. The official story was simple. Heart failure. No autopsy. No investigation. Just a closed coffin and a wave of unanswered questions. But in private, Bobby heard a different account. One shared by Paul Rothschild, the Doors' longtime producer. According to him, Jim had come home after a night out, found a powder on the dresser, and assumed it was something familiar. It wasn't. Whatever happened next, it happened fast. Pam tried to revive him, but the moment slipped away before help could arrive. For Bobby, the details mattered less than the loss itself. Jim wasn't just another rock star who burned too bright. He was a friend, a neighbor, a mind unlike any other. Someone who could sit for hours discussing poetry, or vanish behind a tree to pull a prank, or predict cultural shifts years before they happened. His death didn't just mark the end of an era. It marked the end of their era. The end of the happy, chaotic, creative days when anything felt possible. The end of the Laurel Canyon nights filled with music, laughter, and the sense that they were all part of something bigger than themselves. In the years that followed, Bobby's photographs became part of Jim's legacy. Frozen moments of a young man who lived intensely, loved fiercely, and chased meaning in a world that never stopped chasing him back. Each image captured a different facet of the Lizard King, the poet, the rebel, the trickster, the visionary. And maybe that's why Jim Morrison still fascinates us. Not because of how he died, but because of how he lived, boldly, imperfectly, unapologetically. He was a storm, a spark, a contradiction. A man who refused to be defined by anyone but himself. As Bobby Klein once said, Jim wasn't trying to be a legend. He was trying to be understood. And perhaps in telling these stories, in remembering the breakfasts at Lucky You Cafe, the late-night conversations, the pranks, the music, the poetry, we get a little closer to understanding him. The mystery of his final days may never be solved, but the truth of who he was lives on in the memories of those who knew him, and in the images that captured the fleeting moments when the man stepped out from behind the myth. Jim Morrison, 1943 to 1971, the poet, the provocateur, the Lizard King, Club 27, passed away at 27 years old. On a personal note, Jim Morrison was one of my most favorite musicians, and at my funeral, my death video will be playing the end. If you made it to the end, please subscribe, like, comment. What was your favorite Doors song or story? Put it in the comments, and thank you for watching.